available now for sale in the bookstore at $10 each. And it'd be a worthy investment for you. It's very thin. It's not like this, it's like this. It's maybe 50, 60 pages, but it'd be worthwhile reading that. Amen. Why don't we just open in prayer, ask God's blessing. Father, we thank you today for this opportunity to minister on this very critical subject of biblical parenting, and we give you praise for what you're going to do today. All right, let's turn to Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Proverbs 22, verse 6. You need to really try. I'm a little bit frustrated that some more of our parents with small children aren't coming. They're the ones that we're going to have the most trouble with in the church, more than likely. This is, it's more important than I can emphasize today, because if you don't establish biblical parenting principles from the time your children are very, very small, you're going to have problems. And even being raised in the atmosphere of our church doesn't guarantee or doesn't mean necessarily. A lot of our parents don't practice spanking. They don't practice a lot of very essential, practical, common sense components of what biblical parenting is. So I want to go in a specific direction today that will have a lot to do not just with small children, but also adolescents and teenagers. So let me introduce it this way. Leniency is love. Leniency is love. At least that's what we're told. And that's what a lot of parents today think. Leniency is compassion. You show you care. And after a generation of that philosophy, we're seeing the consequences of it, which is lawlessness. Some of you may be raising children that are destined for lawlessness in their life. No boundaries. Leniency is love. Discipline is hate. Spanking is abuse. Restricting children from what they want to do is harmful. They need to be able to express themselves. And so goes the kind of dribble that we've been hearing for a very long time. And of course, we know that the opposite is true.
Discipline is love. Leniency is hate. And I can say this, and I'm going to use some of the extreme language that the Bible uses. If you don't discipline your children, you hate them. That's what the Bible says. And it's meant to kind of have an element of shock value because there's so much at stake. Disciplining your children will contribute to their success in life. When they hit their adult years and they move forward from there, disciplining them when they're small and growing up is going to contribute to success. Leniency will contribute to their failure. Or at least in both cases, increases the likelihood. Discipline increases the likelihood of success. Leniency increases the likelihood of failure. Of course, there's outliers and exceptions in every situation. We're talking about generally what happens in most cases. And that is the premise of God's word. Discipline is love. Leniency is hate. The Bible gives us a roadmap for raising children, and if you follow it, you increase the likelihood, not guarantee, because human beings have a sinful nature, but you're increasing the likelihood that your children are going to succeed. And I'm going to explain to you precisely why that is today. If you reject the biblical roadmap for raising children, you are increasing the likelihood of your children's failure. Parental responsibility in raising children is critical. And it has such profound implications for the child, for the family, and beyond. Your children will grow up. And if they're lawless in the home because you allow it, they'll be lawless in their teenage and adult years. And they're going to hurt a lot of people. So let's read our text, and we're going to look at a number of the other verses that we've already used. There's a whole cluster of scriptures that are going to be useful for our consideration and our observation from week to week. This is one that is most familiar to everyone. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So let's reinforce then something that we're all familiar with, and that is that every human being has a sinful nature. And if that sinful nature is not subjugated, every human being will go to hell. And that's eternal destiny. And if it isn't subjugated, if a child does not learn how to manage his sinful nature himself when he's a teenager and an adult, he's going to fail in life. And that is a guarantee. And it is your job as a parent, in the initial stages of child rearing, to do that for them. You have to be the one that subjugates your child's sinful nature. They're not going to do it themselves. You have to do it for them, and it's going to be a battle, an unpleasant one. And if you do that successfully, then when they come of age, they're going to be able to do it for themselves. The inclinations and the natural tendencies that your children are exhibiting are going to take them to hell. In a very wrong direction. Consider our text and the verses previous to it. I just caught that this week. What leads up to what we just read? Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he was old, he will not depart from it. Let's look at it. Verse 3. A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. Child won't do that. You have to do that for them. But when a person comes of age, and they're a man or a woman, and they foresee evil, they run from it. A child will run toward it. A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. But the simple, some translations use the word stupid, but the simple pass on and are punished. By humility and the fear of the Lord are riches and honor and life. Thorns and snares are in the way of the perverse. He who guards his soul will be far from them. Your child will not guard their own soul. You have to do it for them, so that when they're old enough, they will. And then it goes into our text. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. He'll be like the prudent man, who when he sees evil, he runs the other way. He'll be like the individual who guards his soul. That's what you're training your children to do for themselves when they come of age. Another translation says, a prudent and far-sighted person sees the evil of sin and hides himself from it. But the naive continue on and are punished by suffering the consequences of sin. And of course, in the most extreme cases, are sitting in prisons. And in most cases, prisoners were raised without discipline. That's just a statistical fact and reality. Most of them without fathers. The reward of humility, that is having a realistic view of one's importance, and the irrelevant worshipful fear of the Lord, is riches and honor in life. Thorns and snares are in the way of the obstinate, for their lack of honor and their wrongdoing traps them. He who guards himself with godly wisdom, he who guards himself. Your children can't guard themselves, you have to do it for them. You have to override their sinful tendencies, and if you do that successfully from the earliest stages possible until they leave your home, the odds are that they're going to be able to continue that. He who guards himself with godly wisdom will be far from them and avoid the consequences that they suffer. Wild and unruly children will grow up to be wild and unruly adults. And here's a good exercise for some of you parents. Those of you that have nursery-aged children, go to the nursery workers and ask how your kids are in the nursery. I hear how they are. They can't function without being disruptive in the atmosphere of the nursery, because you let them function however they want to in the atmosphere of your home, and they transfer into the nursery and there's no boundaries in their life. They have no respect for the authority. Ask the nursery workers how your children are in nursery compared with other children. Proverbs 23:14, this is the New Living Translation. Don't fail to discipline your children. The rod of punishment won't kill them. Physical discipline may well save them from death. New Living Translation. Another translation, I can't remember what the moniker is. It's the TPT translation. I've never seen it before, TPT. Did you find that one? I don't know that you would have. TPT. I don't even know what it means. But anyway, they translated it this way: don't withhold appropriate discipline from your child. Go ahead and punish him when he needs it. Don't worry, it won't kill him. A good spanking could be the very thing that teaches him a lifelong lesson that will save his soul from hell. That's the PST, the Paul Stevens translation I added at the end. Proverbs 19:18. Chasten your son while there is hope, before he ends up in prison. Then there's no hope. Chasten your sons while there is hope of what? Hope of what? Hope of curbing, marginalizing, teaching him to subjugate his sinful nature. And do not set your heart on his destruction. Let me read all that together. Chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. These are extreme terms. If you don't embrace the biblical model for raising children, their destruction is going to be the consequence, and they'll no doubt take other people with them. The word chasten means to chastise or correct or admonish or reprove. And this is a warning that you better be on this. You better have a foresight when it comes to raising children. Too many parents are just short-sighted. They just don't feel like doing such and such right now. I'm not in the mood. I'm frustrated. I'm angry and upset. So I want to take a moment here to talk about the dangers of leniency. Why leniency? Why do so many parents choose the course of thinking that leniency is love, or leniency is compassion, or letting them do what they want to do is somehow a benefit to them? We understand an unbeliever. We understand the philosophy of the world. The philosophy of the world, apart from God's influence, is leniency is love. But why are so many Christian parents lenient? They're not the boss of their home. The child is. They don't establish and maintain borders and boundaries. The word leniency means of a mild or tolerant disposition, not harsh or strict. Leniency equals lawlessness. We see that in our country today. All these lenient, liberal district attorneys in our major cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco and New York City and Chicago, all these woke, lenient district attorneys that should be taking criminals and incarcerating them are letting them back on the streets. They think they're showing compassion and love, and it results in looting and increase of violence and murder. It results in lawlessness. You're raising lawless children is what you're doing. So let me just explore some of the reasons why you choose leniency. One is, leniency can be the result of selfishness and laziness. You're too self-absorbed. Raising children requires discipline and sacrifice. And some parents are just too lazy and undisciplined themselves. I use the example of the dog whisperer. I can't remember his name, but the dog whisperer who says that I don't train dogs, I train people to train dogs. A disciplined dog trainer will raise an obedient dog. The dogs can't do that themselves. They need somebody's oversight who has discipline and who can maintain standards. I have to say it. King David was a lousy father. He was. In 1 Kings chapter 1, he's elderly, dying. Solomon was the one determined by God to be king, but another son of David, Adonijah, forcefully took the throne. And the Bible says, then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. And his father David had not rebuked him at any time by saying, why have you done so? Adonijah had no boundaries in his life. Yeah, I know Solomon's determined to be the king, but I can cross that boundary. I can do what I want to do, and my father's not going to say a thing about it. That's what he thought. He never disciplined Amnon. Amnon was David's son. He had a sister named Tamar from a different mother. So Amnon and Tamar are half-brother and sister. Amnon falls in lust for his sister Tamar and rapes her, and David does nothing about it. And this infuriated Absalom. Crushed Tamar. David was the quintessential lenient father. And this is how the Bible portrays that. Proverbs 13:24, he who spares his rod hates his son. I want that just to sink in for all those who may be listening live stream, all those who may be watching this later on, and all those of you that are here now. If you do not spank your children, you hate them. That's what it says. So you go ahead and run with your little philosophy that I can't cause pain for the little darling, and I'm going to demonstrate how to spank. In 2 weeks, I went back to the back of the church, and I got a cluster of the boys together. Zayden was one of them, and a bunch of the others. And I said, now, which of you will volunteer for the spanking demonstration? Zayden stepped like this and hid behind one of the other little boys. And then David Rodriguez's son said, I will. And I went to David. I said, I think something's wrong with your son. He who spares his rod hates his son. but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. In the immediacy of the wrongdoing, this takes incredible amounts of discipline, and we all probably fail there. So that's one reason why parents are lenient. They're selfish and lazy. They just let things play out. Another reason is you believe the myth that leniency is love. You bought into it. You want to be your child's friend, not their parent. I don't want my child to hate me. They might. I've told that to parents before. If I pull the door off my teenage daughter's bedroom, she's going to hate me. Okay. And of course, leniency is precisely the opposite of how God deals with us. In Hebrews chapter 12, we have a good discourse over 3 verses there. Follow with me. Furthermore, we have had human or earthly fathers who corrected us. Some of you haven't had that, but he's making an assumption here. We've had earthly fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. In other words, the result of the discipline was we had respect for him, did what he said, honored him. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits, meaning God, and live? For they, earthly fathers, indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them. But the Lord for our benefit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. That's what it says. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. But there are a lot of Christian parents, you don't believe that. You don't believe in inflicting pain, and I don't mean physical abuse or physical pain. Shame. Traumatizing a child by disciplining him and restricting him or her from doing what they want to do. This is very unpleasant and painful for them. And there are parents who just won't go through the process of subjugating themselves to that. So they let the child run around. So you believe the myth that leniency is love. Another reason why parents are lenient is you are emotionally immature. It's always about you and your feelings, not what the child needs. I just can't. I just feel so bad for my child. That is emotional immaturity. Your child has to learn to suffer consequences, endure punishment, learn with tears the lessons of life. And too many parents are emotionally immature, and they can't go through that process. There are parents who will do everything they can to ensure that their children will never feel bad. And you think you're doing some good with that. Give them what they want. Never deny them. And then if you do discipline, it's only because you blow up in a fit of rage. Storm around the house, slamming things, yelling and screaming. You'll do more damage to your children through that than through leniency. Because your anger only comes up once in a while. It's not a consistent method of restricting a child's sinful nature. So this has produced a very sad state of affairs. Children that are lawless in the home are going to be lawless as teenagers and adults. Here are the facts. High school graduation rate. I didn't know, I graduated from high school in 1972. Nobody that I knew didn't graduate. I don't know anyone, and that could be an outlier. I don't know, back then, if you're that age, did you know anyone who didn't graduate? I don't know. I didn't. 73.9%. This is El Paso figures, the graduation rate. So 27% of high school age kids don't graduate. 16% of them don't finish the 9th grade. And they say, well, it's poverty. It's first generation Americans who are just moving from another country or emigrating, or it's bullying. Well, all those things were around. Some of those things were around when I was a kid. It didn't obstruct the graduation rate. You know, I'll give you a reason for the low graduation rate. My non-scientific analysis is that the low graduation rate is related to pathetic parenting. How do you like that? It's not poverty. It's not all the other reasons that people give. It is pathetic parenting who don't establish borders and boundaries in their children's lives. Undisciplined children, unchallenged children, raised in chaos, don't have the discipline, either morally or intellectually, to live within the boundaries of going to school until graduation. Teenage pregnancy. 3 in 10 teenage unmarried American girls will get pregnant at least once before age 20. 3 in 10, that's incredible. That's nearly 750,000 teen pregnancies every year. Becoming pregnant is the leading reason why girls drop out of school, why they don't get educated, and why they're destined for poverty, and many of them never marry. Over half of them never marry. More than 50% of teenage mothers never graduate from high school. 55% of teenage boys and girls have sex before they're 18. No boundaries. They weren't raised with boundaries. They weren't disciplined. Here's a line. You don't cross that line. No self-control. No recognition. This is dangerous. I've got to curb my appetite. And so now they've come of age and they have no respect for any boundaries. If it feels good, I should be able to do it because that's what my parents allowed. They always let me do whatever I want to do. They always indulged me. No one should ever tell me I can't do something I want to do. Youth violence. Remember what I said, leniency equals lawlessness. Homicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for young people ages 10 to 24. It's incredible. Homicide, murder. All you got to do is pick up the newspaper from Chicago or New York or one of the bigger inner cities. 1,400 youth homicides a day. A study of 13,986 women in prison showed that more than half grew up without a father. 42% grew up in a single mother household, and 16% lived with neither parent. No discipline. Chaos. No authority. 85% of all youths sitting in prison today grew up in a fatherless home. And it's not to say that a mother can't be a good disciplinarian, but there's something to be said for the presence of a father, his authority, and his ability to discipline his children according to a biblical model that leads to success and can lead to success. A single mother can discipline her children. Of course they can. What about mental illness? Suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death among young people. Homicide 3rd, suicide 2nd. There are reports of children as young as 8 years old committing suicide. Depression, self-harm like cutting, which is very common among girls, teenage girls, emotional upheaval and anger. A lot of children today are growing up angry because of the divorce of their parents. Things like ADHD, anxiety problems, behavioral problems, depression are the most commonly diagnosed mental disorders among children. And this isn't about blame, but a lot of this has to do with the environment that children have been exposed to in their home. Pathetic parenting. Leniency equals lawlessness. Boundaries are removed. In some places, I think in California, they have the $1,000 rule in places like Walgreens and CVS, and a lot of those companies have moved out of California. You can go in and steal up to $1,000 worth of merchandise and let you walk out the door. And they even go to the counter and have it rung up to make sure it's under $1,000, and then they leave. And it's allowed. Ernie was telling me about the what did he call it? Grab and run. Vehicles pulling up to another vehicle, looking inside, seeing a purse or a briefcase or just some things on the back seat, smash the window, grab stuff, and take off. Nobody does anything. Nobody even calls the police. Nobody tries to stop it. The person in the vehicle might have a gun, and so just let it go. That happened in a McDonald's when Ernie was there just yesterday morning. All right, so here's what I really want to talk about, which is the necessity of boundaries. This is the key to understanding what success is in life. This is the key to understanding what success is in life. A human being has got to learn to live within boundaries. When you're raising your children, you enforce those boundaries, establish them, so that when children are adults, they can do that willingly and voluntarily. This has to be installed at the earliest possible opportunity. Some of you parents have put yourself at a disadvantage because your kids are 5 and 6 years old. That's why they terrorize the nursery, because you don't have no boundaries at home. Like I said, I dare you, go ask the nursery workers how your children are in the nursery. And if your children are 5, 6, 7 years old, you haven't installed boundaries, it's not too late, but you better get about that business right now, because not establishing boundaries for them is ensuring, more than likely, their failure. Our sinful nature wants to push the envelope. If you tell your child, do not open that drawer, something comes over them. And that's the drawer. There can be 15 drawers in the cabinet. That's the one they're going to want to open. That's their sinful nature. Children do not have self-awareness or situational awareness that enables them to make judgments that will keep them safe. You can't, if you're going to let your child play in the front yard, you have to have a fence. If the ball gets kicked up against the fence, no problem. If you don't have a fence and it goes out into the street, they're going to run out into the street. They don't have situational awareness. You have to have it for them. And then teach them along the way. You don't play in the street. You don't run in the street. It's dangerous. You can't poke your baby sister in the eye with a pencil. You can't play with a butcher knife. A 2-year-old will pick up a butcher knife. And if they do that, after being told no, there has to be a consequence. Why? So they learn. And this is always going to be the case in life, from childhood to adulthood. When you're a child, your parents are there to establish boundaries and force you to live within the confines of them. Force you to live within the confines of them. When you're an adult, you have to do it for yourself, or the consequences are a lot worse than a spanking. And if you can't live within boundaries, you're going to lose privilege and freedom in life. Driving, you have to drive according to speed limits. You have to control the impulse to speed, to do something dangerous or illegal. Shouldn't be texting when you're driving. Slow down to 20 when you're in front of a school zone. These are boundaries. And a child that has grown up with boundaries will be able to live within boundaries. My life has very narrow boundaries. If I'm going to be a success, I have to voluntarily live within the narrow boundaries that define my life. I've been married for 49 years. Faithful to the boundary. One woman for life. I don't cross lines. I do not derive fulfillment either physically or emotionally from any woman other than my wife. The reason people can't stay married today, they've never learned boundaries. They think I should be able to do whatever I want to do, whatever makes me happy, whatever fulfills me. You don't cross lines. Or you come from a home where lines weren't respected. There was adultery and unfaithfulness and divorce and boyfriends and girlfriends. And you lived in this chaos where family life and relationship between a man and a woman didn't have no boundaries. It's anything go. I'm with this guy this week and another one the next week and this girl now and a year later with someone else. No marriage, divorces, chaos, adultery. What do you think you're going to raise? Being a Christian, narrow boundaries. That's why Jesus said it's a narrow road. If I'm going to fulfill my calling and do my job, I have to live within very narrow boundaries. And if you never learn that in your life, you are going to fail. And if you're not instilling those in your children now, they are going to fail. They'll become lawless. Consider the 10 Commandments. Apart from being God's definition of righteousness, the 10 Commandments are boundaries that we have to live within the framework of if we're going to make heaven our home. And our salvation enables us to do that. You shall have no other gods before me. I think Ernie used a statistic last week that 70% of evangelical Christian youth think that you can get to heaven by other religions. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall make no graven image. You don't make something physical to represent God. That's idolatry. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. You've got to narrow the boundary of how you talk. Keep holy the Sabbath. There should be a day of the week that's devoted to spiritual things, to worshiping God, being fed. And then it goes into 6 boundaries that govern relationships. Honor your father and mother. Don't kill. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. Don't slander your neighbor, and don't covet your neighbor's goods. Those are boundaries. Your sinful nature will take you outside of those boundaries. You'll end up being a gossiper, hating your mother and father, being a liar, a cheater, a thief. That's where your sinful nature will take you. The 10 Commandments are boundaries. And if your children are going to grow up as teenagers and adults and choose to live within the framework of that, you're the one that's got to teach them about boundaries. Children have to learn to respect boundaries. This is not an option. And every time they cross a boundary and you don't deal with it, you're teaching them something that has the potential to destroy them later on. Because a lot of the boundaries that shouldn't be crossed don't bring an immediate consequence. We can get away with a lot of stuff in life, right? But if you teach your children, here's the boundary, but he keeps crossing it, you don't do nothing. That's the kind of people they're going to grow up to be. They're going to try to get away with crossing the boundary as much as they can. And then dad blows up, has a temper fit, and then I'm going to get on this side of the boundary. Okay, dad, I get it. It's not going to work. You're raising children that are doomed to fail. 1 Samuel. Take special note of the wording here. In that day, 1 Samuel 3:12, in that day, this is the Lord speaking to Samuel, in that day I will perform against Eli, rather. I will perform against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them. They were unwilling to restrain themselves. Father's going to have to do some restraining. Therefore I have sworn to the house of Levi that the iniquity of Levi's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever. In other words, this father, because of his leniency, his sons fornicated in the house of God, and he said, shame, shame, you shouldn't do that, but didn't do nothing about it. God said that's going to bring a curse that's going to strike your family for every generation. You're setting something in motion with how you parent your children. So what's a parent to do? And you better think about this. These kids of yours are going to grow up. What kind of adults are you training them to be? Respect boundaries and choose to live within them. Life produces consequences when you cross boundaries. You can't have a marriage unless you respect boundaries. You can't successfully have a working life or a career unless you respect boundaries. You can't be a professional athlete. They have very narrow boundaries. If you want the benefits of being a professional athlete, these are the boundaries, and you better respect them. There are certain things you can't do, certain things that are not allowed, certain things that you want to do that you must not do because they'll destroy your life. So you better get your head, parents, and your heart wrapped around biblical parenting. Some of you think you know better than God. That's why you don't spank your children. You think you know better than God? Really? Pride, ignorance, unwillingness to discipline yourself. You probably need an altar to dedicate yourself to God as parents and establish biblical parenting in your home from this day forward. As hard as it may be, as stressful and difficult and as much discipline and sacrifice as it's going to require for you, there's too much at stake not to do it. And this brings a sobering reality. You don't have very long. You don't have very long to do this before it becomes a huge disadvantage, and before the disciplining of your children will be in the hands of others. It'll be in the hands of school teachers. It'll be in the hands of police. You didn't teach them boundaries, so the cops have to. And again, if your children are 5, 6, 7, 4, and you haven't been working at teaching them boundaries, you're at a disadvantage. I have to say that. But it isn't too late, and you better make a move now, and you better get this in order. Let's bow our heads for a moment. Every head bowed, every eye closed. I want to really implore you, coming late to these classes is not acceptable. You need to be on time if you've got children. You need to be an example, and you need to encourage other parents to be here. A lot at stake here. And this is going to be a huge year. I'm hoping that you parents of smaller children will never forget this Sunday school. And I recommend make a path to our bookstore this morning and get that book. We're going to get, we're ordering more. I can't remember how many I told Pastor to order, but we're ordering a bunch more of them. But there's 20 available right now, $10 a book. And I'm not making a profit. I'm paying more than that for the book. But that's a worthy investment on your part. I want you to pray with me right now. Everyone praying. God in heaven, I thank you for the gift of my children. And I am going to dedicate myself from this day forward to absorb biblical parenting. I want the revelation of it. And Lord, I need you to help me be the parent that loves our children and will do what is necessary to bring discipline into the home, establishing boundaries that will save their lives. I dedicate myself to biblical parenting. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. We do not have time for questions, so perhaps next week we will. I think I gave you a mouthful. These Sunday schools are on live stream right now, but you can also watch them later in the week, and I recommend you do that. Watch this again. And anyone who's not here that should be here ought to be checking this out. It's going to help you enormously. The Lord bless you. We begin revival services very